welcome. My name is Richard Harmon. I'm the Global Head of Financial Services at Red Hat. And we have an exciting panel here today covering the topic of central bankers at the frontier, the state of the art in advanced analytics and AI. And we have four highly distinguished central bank executives that will share some of their insights. Let me do a quick basic introduction, and then we can start with small presentations. First is Ben Sorensen. Ben is a Senior Director of Analytics, Currency, and the Corporate Portfolio from the Bank of Canada. Welcome. Then we have Ulrika Fieldfly, who is the Head of Information Technology and the Deputy Head of Corporate Services Department at Riksbank, the Swedish National Bank. Then we have Dirk Rogens, who is the Deputy Director General at the ECB. And finally, and not least, Rob Eltsey, the CIO and the Executive Director of Technology with the Bank of England. I think, Ben, maybe we start with your presentation first.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel as well. Pleasure to be here. With respect to the current state of advanced analytics and machine learning at the Bank of Canada, I think first and foremost, it's important to mention that the bank has invested considerably in the current environment and will continue to invest in it going forward. By way of example, we have recently put in place enterprise data strategy, an enterprise digital strategy as well, even a cloud-first strategy. Cloud-first technology is also being implemented as we speak. And on top of that, we see an expansion of data science experiments, analytic solutions, many different aspects of the value chain. In fact, one could even argue that we're kind of hopscotching all over the maturity curve a bit, if you will, from data visualization, analytic solutions, machine learning, even a bit of quantum, kind of all steps of that maturity curve, if you will. And so we're playing in all areas. And one of the other things that we see that I think is an important part to mention in terms of the context is that as the different groups in the bank start to prioritize the data aspects of their business, the silos between the different teams are starting to come down. So you see more of a collaborative, coordinative effort between teams that maybe historically would not have worked so closely together. And I recognize it depends on how you're organized, but at the Bank of Canada, it would be the markets, the analytics teams, the IT teams, the knowledge teams, data, and even the external web is increasingly part of this value chain. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is how we think about the world from an analytics solutions perspective, not particularly novel in terms of the fact that you want some common platforms and common tools, and then you build your analytics solutions with the contextual data on top of that. But just a couple of things that I wanted to underscore. One is the presence of a data lake, a cloud-based data lake that we're implementing currently, and then also perhaps an overlooked aspect, but a feature that we consider part of the platform, and that is the way that we work, referred to in the styles, the Agile and DevOps. I know there's a lot of investment going on at the Bank of Canada, and I suspect that other central banks and organizations worldwide with respect to the recruitment of diverse perspectives, diverse knowledge, the development of technical skills. But our experience at the Bank of Canada has been that the way that we deploy those skills, the way we work together, is equally important as those things in terms of fulfilling our analytics future. Next slide, please. Another aspect of our journey at the Bank of Canada has been the development of what we call the DAS, or the Digital Analytic Zone. And the research services platform is part of that. And so that is a cloud-based segregated environment, suitable up to a certain sensitivity level, but it's a self-contained team. So to the extent that you want to onboard users or deploy new technologies within that particular environment, this team of 7, not all completely dedicated to this effort, but this team does it all. And so it provides an environment, whether you're deploying technologies inside the Azure cloud or from outside the cloud and bringing it to put into the environment, a place to play, a place to learn. If your organization is a believer in the 70-20-10 learning model, where 70% is on-hand experience-based learning, this could be an ideal tool. It has proven quite successful for us so far in terms of giving employees a place to try things on outside of traditional corporate constraints to see how well they would fit and meet their needs. Next slide, please. And this zone, if you will, is divided into different subzones. And I mention that here only to underscore the fact that we've got different stakeholder groups that this serves. So there's a research community that's interested in particular research-based tools. On top of that, we have a research services environment, which is a collaborative environment with people outside of the Bank of Canada, where they can come together to collaborate on work. There's a space for IT as well, and a space for specific data science, machine learning type experiments. And so a lot of the experimental work on the data science side is actually taking place inside this particular zone before we get to, hopefully we'll see in the future, an operational production type environment. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, like many organizations, I suspect the key challenge is just keeping pace with the business. There's a lot of experiments, a lot of pilots underway. The goal, of course, is to see how many of these we can get into operations. But I think that invites another question, and that is, at least from the machine learning standpoint, is how big will the end state footprint be? That is currently an unknown for us. We're just dabbling in the space. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but to the extent that it is a very large footprint, I think it will start to introduce some questions around governance. How do we govern these machine learning models in a different way? And then it also, of course, like any new things, it's largely additive work, and so it will bring stress onto the IT system that we'll have to manage. It invites questions around centralization as everyone starts to leverage a common platform, and with that comes costs. Security is obviously a factor in there as well. And then skills development is paramount to our future. I mentioned the role of the digital analytics zone in terms of skills development, but we have to partner with our colleagues in human resources to explore ways to be more intentional about some of the skill sets that we rely on, to make them more common across the organization and less niche even within the department. And then this always has the backdrop of the degree of scale of investment and transformation going forward, particularly in a post-pandemic world. And so the bank is just in the process of developing its 3-year strategic plan starting in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see the priority that is put forth in that respect there. And then quantum, I mentioned here because it's hard to talk about advanced analytics without mentioning quantum in the central banking community. Clear implications on the security side, of course, but also we're trying to understand the applicability for some particular use cases around, say, optimization problems and these sorts of things. I know that's a very high level overview of kind of the current state at the Bank of Canada, but happy to follow up with anyone directly afterwards if of interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. That was a great way to kick off these discussions. The one thing we have here with the four central bank executives is a real range of very, very large institutions and also smaller national institutions. So now I'd like to have Ulrika present what the Reichsbank is doing, and it's an example of one of the smaller institutions among the great central bank representatives we have here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about advanced analytics and AI at Sveriges Riksbank. The next slide, please. Our overall vision for information management is the right data in the right situation. Did you change? So the right information needs to be available to the right user at the right time with the right quality in an efficient way. Data is key for advanced analytics and AI. So to achieve our vision, we need to handle our data as a critical asset. Data is the gold of our time, so we need to treat it as precious as we treat the gold. We need to have appropriate data management. We need to establish rules, routines, and have a data catalog so we know what data we have, how to access it, and with clear definitions so we know the data and can trust the data. We need to provide an analytic platform with efficient tools to serve different users with different needs. And of course, we need to handle big data volumes, both structured and unstructured data. Next slide, please. So we have different kind of users that need different type of support and access to different type of data. We have our researchers, the data scientists, that are experts, and they need more freedom to explore and do in-depth analysis on, for instance, microdata. They need to access and handle big data volumes and unstructured data. They need to be able to choose their own advanced tools and try out new areas. They are very skilled in new ways of working, and they need nearly no support. On the other hand, we have our data consumers and decision makers who need efficient, standardized, and easy tools to visualize and access the data. Their needs of data are more predictable and recurrent. And sometimes standardized report can be enough, but sometimes they also want to dive into the data. And then we have the analysts who are somewhere in between the researchers and the data consumers and the decision makers. They need to be able to focus on the analysis without putting too much time in how to get hold of the data or manage the data. They shall have efficient tools and guidelines to support their needs, which can differ depending on what sort of analysis they are doing. So sometimes they're more towards the researchers, and sometimes they're more towards the decision makers. Next slide, please. So to support different user needs, we are now implementing a data analytics platform. And the goal with this platform is to provide different tools and support for different user groups with different skills and needs during the entire analytical process in a customized and user-friendly way. So from the data collection, we need to have efficient tools and ways to collect the data. We need to manage the data, where we handle the data and the data quality. And we need to store it. And we have, during the analysis process, we have different tools to support different user categories, and all the way to how to present and share the results of the analysis. Our guiding principles are that we shall democratize the access to that data and the possibility to perform analysis in an easy way. We want to reduce dependency on individuals and suppliers. It should be user-friendly and accessible to all users. It is also it shall also be easy to communicate and share the result from the analysis, both internally and externally. Easy to share our results and work together and learn from each other. We shall also be able to use modern ways of presenting with more possibility to advanced visualization. And next slide. Real-time data collection. Finally, an example of an experimental project that the research division and the data scientists conducted during the last year. We now have the possibilities of monitoring the economy at a higher frequency, and the COVID-19 pandemic has placed pressure on central banks to monitor the economy at a higher frequency than usual. In order to be able to quickly estimate how the pandemic affected the Swedish economy, we expanded our collection of high-frequency data, real-time indicators. We announced an experimental project that opened participation to the general public. We created a website that allowed real-time data sharing and visualizations with external participants, including academics and private companies. Next slide, please. So instead of requesting sensitive microdata and dedicating staff to learn its underlying data structure, the Riksbank instead decentralized the process by opening up a collaborative public channel through which academics and the private sector directly can contribute to the research in real time. Private companies, which know their data well and have skilled data scientists on staff, could decide what to contribute and in which form to provide it. So you can see on the left corner here, you can see the site Boka Bord, a digital restaurant table booking service, who offer to contribute weekly data of table bookings in Sweden. So you can see the drop in table bookings in March last year. And there are other examples here too. So this is a sort of crowdsourcing of data where we don't need to collect and handle all the data ourselves. It's more a collaborative approach. And you can find more about it if you follow the link at the right bottom side here. So maybe next slide, please. So finally, some challenges and success factors. This is a complex area, and you should start with think big, make up the big picture, but start small, and then work towards the goal step by step. And as I said in the beginning, data is key. It's the gold of our time. So you have to take real care of the data and the data quality and have reliable data. And you also have to be prepared to handle new type of data. And also security, data classification and secure access to data is a very important area. And finally, you have to prepare to the speed of change and new possibilities in this area, and foster a culture that adapt change and try out new things. And you should work cross-functionally in an innovative way. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Ulrika. Those are some great examples. Now we'll hear from Dirk. So the last two central banks are the two largest of the panel. So Dirk from the ECB, please, if you could share a few thoughts. Yep.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Well, since several years, artificial intelligence is one of the key strategic topics within the ECB, and today even more predominantly. Of course, it goes without saying that for a central bank, data is core and part of our genes. So within ECB, our vision is to introduce AI in all domains of central banking and supervision, to go much more beyond proof of concepts and pilots to real reusable services and applications, and to accelerate the delivery and to upscale the AI solutions to improve as well decision-making as operational efficiency. We want to shift as much as possible manual tasks to AI models to augment the intelligence of our workforce and to come to better decision-making. But to be successful with AI, the underlying data needs to be well prepared, trusted, and easily accessible. And even more important is the need for strong business ownership, their focus, their acceptance, and their support for the transformation, in other words, the business change management. That's why in our strategy, we put a lot of emphasis on data centricity as well as on AI. We invested early, around 2016, into a centralized data platform for heavy analytical workloads beyond traditional databases. Our platform is called the Data Intelligence Service Center. This data platform allows already today, of course, and since some time, processing of huge volumes of data, both in what we call corporate store, which is centrally governed, as well in experimental data labs for exploration. This platform enables our data scientists to generate their own data products and to also execute all their AI endeavors. This platform really improved the analytical offerings within the ECB, simply because we could no longer launch never-ending processes of projects, which is in particular very important for advanced analytics and AI, where the time to market is much more critical. We all know that AI nowadays is omnipresent, it's everywhere. So we came to the conclusion that we need to streamline our AI strategy even further. And also we had to resolve certain bottlenecks that we identified with our centralized data platform. To achieve this, we have created an overall AI framework that includes, for instance, as a starter preparation phase with very clear quality gates to assess the engagement of as well the business and IT, which we consider as very important, followed by a severely time-boxed exploration phase, embracing the startup atmosphere required for innovative ideas to flourish, but time-boxed so that it doesn't go on forever. Here, during that phase, the make or buy decisions is a key activity. Then this is followed by a real development phase where we build the make models or we configure the buy solutions. And last but for sure not least, we have a machine learning ops phase where we have to strive to enable the reusability of the solution. For the moment, as we speak, we are looking at an end-to-end machine learning pipeline, considering both cloud-native approach as well as on-prem architecture. Now, to be able to refresh a bit, besides this overarching AI strategy, I mentioned another AI success factor. That's the timely and easy access to data. Well, with our platform, we aimed at having as many data sets as possible in one place, giving easy access and offering different tools to analyze them. And this was really a step in the right direction, but we witnessed also some pressure points as well in the ECB as we see in the market. Firstly, the ever-growing amount of data and source proliferation, as we all know, that overloads the data factory team. And secondly, the flexibility needs of the data scientists. They need data and computational capacity immediately. These pressure points has to be solved, and we are looking at a paradigm shift. We think that a paradigm shift is necessary. The next enterprise data platform or the next generation enterprise data platform is in the convergence of distributed domain data architecture, self-service platform design, and data product thinking, which is a bit a mind shift. We expect the data platform of the future to be built upon distributed data domains owned by independent cross-functional fluid teams. Those teams should have embedded all data skill sets and use the common platform to host, prepare, and serve their data sets, as well to execute their advanced analytics and AI endeavors. For me, the last AI success factor that I want to touch upon is an example for strong business ownership. At the ECB, we created a subtech hub, which is composed of both IT and SSM staff. It acts as a catalyst for innovation and addresses the supervisory needs, using technological innovation within the domain of AI and advanced analytics. It is a kind of hub-spoke model where the hub identifies the business needs, detects the synergies, acts as an innovation facilitator within these AI activities, and ensure strong business ownership. We have already several activities ongoing applying these principles of this AI strategy, as well in the SSM as in the central banking portfolio. Give some examples. The fit and proper machine reading tool, supporting, for instance, 2,500 assessments every day in SSM. Textual analysis with natural language processing, supporting the time-consuming analysis of hundreds and hundreds of documents. A virtual lab for SSM-wide collaboration to enable ECB, NCBs, and CAs all to connect, to share their data, to share their models, to interact with each other. We developed a truffle search, an intelligent information search based on natural language processing and machine learning. And we started together with our economists a daily price data set project, which introduced web scraping techniques using machine learning and NLP. What we should take away here is that, and I strongly believe in it, is that an organization can have the right roadmap, the right technology, the right funding for an AI program, and still fail at execution. So an AI strategy needs to be based on certain foundations. Beside a strong vision, we need to be joined at the hips with the business to choose and focus on the right use cases. We need to bring our staff to the next level by upskilling everyone and maintaining the right mix of operationalization, inspired innovation, and also industrialization. Nevertheless, we need to keep in mind that each evolution tries to address better set challenges presented with the previous technology. And this is a cycle that never ends. And with these words, I want to hand back to you, Richard.
Thank you. Those are really wonderful insights, and clearly the scale of the ECB comes out. Anyway, last but definitely not least, Rob from the Bank of England. Maybe you could share a few of your thoughts, and then afterwards we can start with a panel discussion.
Richard, thank you. Yeah, I thought I'd focus on three kind of topics today. So AI analytics at the bank, which is very similar to some of the other presentations we've heard. So I won't dwell too much on that. I'll focus a little bit on cyber actually and its use and AI being used in cyber, which I think there's some real novel applications that are worth considering and some really good user cases in this space. And then finally talk a little bit about ethics, the culture and skills, which I think, although touched on by many of the other discussions, are really sort of the area of real interest as we move forwards on the topic of AI now. So if we just move on a little. So before I kind of get going, I thought it was interesting to recognise Alan Turing, who pioneer actually of AI, given that he's going to be appearing on the £50 note that's launched later this year in the UK. Turing gave quite I guess one of the earliest publicised lectures in about 1947 on what was then AI, where he said, what we want is a machine that can learn from experience and possibly of letting the machine alter its own instructions, provides a mechanism for this. So I think really quite interesting how early on AI was being considered, or certainly its future applications. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about where we are on our journey. So clearly we focus mainly on what I would consider to be analytically narrow intelligence at the moment. I think we have some user cases that start to get into the kind of more general intelligence. And then, like many, I think we're wondering and we are thinking about the future, really. And when you start to enter into the realms of super intelligence, what would that do? How would regulation look in that kind of world? And I think that's one that we often think about on the horizon. So for us, the use of cloud, we have all the typical challenges, which when it comes to operating model, financing, looking at, of course, security and elements like that, has been, we continue to develop on that space. We're developing an understanding of real kind of recognition of business outcomes. As a CIO, yes, I'm interested in analytics, but I'm also incredibly minded on where we put our investment and what do we get back for that return on investment. So I'm much more focused now on, rather than just having platforms and new capability, but actually what is the value, the genuine organizational value that we're generating. In cloud, certainly, and the future role it plays in analytics is a really important topic. And in fact, I recall spending about 90 minutes only a couple of months ago talking to our governor and governors about the use of cloud and how we will utilize it in respect to analytics. So it's clearly got a lot of attention. Like many data platform, we implemented one about 4 years ago. It is a large Hadoop cluster, which allows users to kind of use everything from R to R Shiny to Tableau. They're spinning up Python. They're using Python. They're able to spin up their own environments on demand, and they've got access to large quantities of data. But with, I guess, one of the other areas that comes into importance there is as we look more to developing out the kind of skills and governance around it. A couple of examples that we have today that have been quite interesting would be nowcasting GDP using news. So, what's in the news, text-based confidence indices, growth in forecast, etc. Bottom-up understanding of the labour market using things like job adverts, which is incredibly interesting. And to be honest, one of the other areas is kind of the normal anomaly detection. So especially as we'll talk in a second around cybersecurity, but also operational areas, we're using our AI and ML capability in that space quite a bit. Skills and governance, I say, is a really interesting area for me. We have changed this quite radically over the last few years to things like having a dedicated information governance group that sits as a subcommittee to one of our exec boards. We also appointed a chief data officer who's an executive director to show, I guess, the importance of governance and structure, who I work very closely with. We have a centralized data governance team. We have an advanced analytics team, which is built up of a hybrid of business and technology resources. But I think as we go through, for us, it's really important that we focus on how do we maintain algorithms that are transparent, accountable, and making sure they're fair. And these are things that run very core through the values that we have today. So if I move on a little bit to cyber and AI, which is on the next slide. So there's a couple of things to call out on here. I think one of the really interesting areas is the user behavior analytical capability. So the growing field, if you like, of UBA is that we can now detect anomalies, patterns, and behaviors of use and respond to these quickly. Good examples for us is if a device pops up in an unknown location, we would block it. We see large volumes of documents moving, we're able to take immediate action. And I think with things like the growth of ransomware now, this is becoming an incredibly important application of kind of machine learning and certainly AI in regards to being able to respond incredibly quickly, quicker than we've got time to analyze the data and take human intervention. We want to make these interventions very quickly. Currently, we're defining most of these behaviors, but we're starting to now bring online methods and methodologies that then start to learn from user behavior and actually update the kind of parameters that we use to monitor. I noticed I was reading an article the other day where a number of organizations are now looking at things like speed of typing on passwords to identify if the user is in fact the person logging in or whether they should be restricted. Information security is another area where we're applying quite a lot of what we've learned over the last few years. There are a number of simple even applications out there that can help huge, which are based on AI kind of construct. If I think about how we, for example, prompting users when sending an email to say, you don't normally email this person at bank A, it's normally at bank B, and therefore restricting them from being able to send it. That kind of technology for us has enabled us to save hundreds of thousands of emails going out incorrectly, and perfecting, as Eureka was saying earlier, that really important information and the use themselves. So there's quite a bit more, I think, development in certainly the future kind of SOCs, and the work we're doing there is very much now analytically based, whereas years ago it was more about control tool sets. We're seeing more data scientists working in that space, to be brutally honest. So we move on to the final slide, which I think just to challenge our thinking. And this area for me is one that is incredibly important, which is, we talked a bit about changing skill sets and mindsets, but AI natives, I think, is a really interesting area for us. I'm conscious of the differences of how the workforce will transform. A good example for me is my daughters, for example, who, they will ask Alexa or Siri questions which I probably would never have considered asking in the first instance. It is native to them. It reminds me of a discussion I had with a bunch of very smart graduates from Cambridge, actually. We were talking about digitalization across the industry. What was really clear is their view was that, maybe I was let off a little, but that digital was a learned behavior for me. But they considered themselves to be digital natives, and they could see that they would naturally move to social media and various different interactions as it came naturally, rather than being a learned behavior, which many of our workforces have today. And I think the same can be applied to the example of my daughter. When they enter the workplace, they will be native to AI, where many of those graduates I spoke to will probably still be learning that concept, and thinking about how we re-educate the workforce to really challenge their mindsets is something that we think about quite a great deal, as well as just generally skilling them. So I think the other final point I would talk about on this subject is around the sort of data ethics piece. If you take the example of my daughters I spoke to a while ago, they will automatically trust the output from something like Alexa, but they're not really thinking about the algorithm that's generated. I think we're going to spend a huge amount of time understanding and regulating the algorithms themselves to make sure that we understand whether we're getting false positives or whether we're getting true information, because we become incredibly reliant on that type of technology. I think that would be an interesting piece for us to look at. And similarly, the role of the technologist continues to evolve. Certainly for me, it now blurs the line between data platforms and, if you like, and data products. And the user skill set is becoming so much more technical that we are moving to that kind of one tribe method now. And I think we're seeing that increasingly at the bank, which is how do we bring together teams on a shared outcome rather than differentiating between IT and business users. It becomes a coordinated team focused on delivering something. The role of IT and the technology team, we're there always to create guardrails, look at economies of scale, make sure we're bringing in the right tooling. But certainly I can see this evolving even more so over the future years as we become closer aligned to the business users as they become more technically adept. So I'll stop there, but clearly some serious thinking going on at the bank about how we use it, and some real use cases where we're getting some huge benefit from it.
Great, Rob. That was fantastic. I think the four central bank execs have given a nice perspective across a range of topics. So now we have some time for hopefully a nice lively dialogue and a discussion. So one thing that that really stands out within the central bank community is it's a community of cooperation globally, right? You share amongst yourselves a lot of things, but it's also an innovative community, as exactly as you've highlighted here. But sort of the first topic I'd like to bring up, which is, I think actually Ben has sort of touched on this as well as others, but the market for advanced analytics is rapidly changing, as with lots of areas of technology. And how does a central bank that's also a regulator and has a lot of significant regulatory requirements, how do you deal with sort of this pace of technological change? I don't know if Ben or Derek or Ulrika, if either of you. Rob just spoke, so I'm going to give him the break.
I can break the ice.
Okay, great. Yeah,
I would say it's not easy because the market is changing rapidly indeed. I can share some secrets. Well, we on one hand we continue to scan the market. We are in close contact with our providers, which delivers also a lot of good ideas. We listen to our customers, our business colleagues, of course. We launch on-hands explorations, prototypes, minimal viable products. We are, for all this, really supported by our business partners, and we work together, joined at the hips, and we do that under the coordination of our innovation team. On the other hand, we have to keep our platform up to date, because if we don't keep our platform up to date, then we show very interesting things in the market, but we cannot deliver them. So what we do to cope is that we need our platform of the future, let's call it 1 second, to be built upon these distributed data products oriented around domains, because we see we have now big data platforms, millions of data come in, but you have to see that you still manage it and that you can work with it. So for us, this data, this distributed data owned by independent cross-functional teams using, of course, a common data infrastructure is very key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo that point. I mean, what keeps me up at night on this topic is just trying to stay as close as possible to the business users, to get inside their head. We're starting to think of it just to build from Dirk's point in a slightly nuanced way, and that is like there are aspects of the ecosystem that really ought to be standardized, and then there are aspects of the ecosystem where you can allow a bit more flexibility. So typically in our experience, a lot of the innovation or the velocity happens closer to the user, and so like you can't have a lot of different data platforms, but you could have different tools accessing those data platforms, and trying to find that equilibrium, if you will, is a priority for us. And an area that we are exploring is the extent to which we could or should introduce like an API layer, and to introduce some decoupling to enable some of that flexibility in the system as well.
I can join in that discussion. It's all about being close to the business and also work with cross-functional teams, just as Dirk and Ben said, and foster sort of an innovative culture where you try out new things and when you experiment with new possibilities and new techniques together with the business. I think that's very important. But it's also, of course, as you said, we have some part of the business that we can experiment with and some parts that we can't. So we have to balance that a lot. And I also think we can. It's as we said, it's a good community. We learn from each other, from other central banks, and we are in the same area sort of. Even if we are, for instance, in Sweden, we are a smaller bank and comparing with Canada or England and ECB, but we still have the same question, the same problems. So I think we can learn a lot from each other.
Mm-hmm.
I would just, Richard, I'd offer a couple of practical thoughts as well, because I completely agree with the comments made so far. I think the interesting challenge for us is that we're not competing against each other. We're not really being digitally disrupted, if you like, because we're trying to launch new products to market every day. We have a very different role to play. So you're the right kind of colleagues talking about how do you horizon scan, how do you look at it differently? It's important that we continue to challenge ourselves. I think one of the other things which is quite useful, and we do a lot of the things like hackathon groups within the teams that can come up with new ideas, try new things. We had a lovely one for about half a day where people voluntarily came in to do these things, but they would take over the camera, for example, in our canteen and use machine learning algorithms to understand the queue depth, right? But actually what they're doing is they're trying new skills, they're trying new ways of doing things. Clearly they had a really useful way of finding out how long the queue was going to be for lunch at the end of it, but it was quite interesting how it enabled the more senior developers to show the younger developers how to do different things and vice versa. But it was away from the normal problems to allow them to explore new tooling. There's things like that are really helpful. We've done some external collaboration as well with other external organizations. I think the challenge is you don't always, it's good to be on the bleeding edge, but with AI and ML, I think it's such a broad sentiment that actually in some ways you have a bit of a second mover advantage because you can spend a considerable amount of money on this type of technology. But it's really important that you stay focused on, well, what is it we're trying to get? What's the question we're trying to answer? What's the value we're trying to deliver? And in some ways, by watching the horizon, you can make, I guess, punch your investments in the right place and really work with value for money in mind.
Yeah. No, those are great comments. I mean, it's clear that all of you see sort of the linkage between what you're doing on the AI side with what your business requirements are and sort of the value proposition of those. But I also love to see this story about, lunch line estimates. And it's the innovative, creative side that you're trying to change the culture of people, which I think these are fantastic examples for other institutions, to take into heart. So one of the areas that all of you have mentioned, and particularly in a central banking environment, is the foundational aspect of data, and obviously you have different scales of data, but I think it'd be really beneficial to the wider audience if you could share a little about some of the best practices that you've sort of learned from how you manage data, and then how is some of this then supporting what you're doing in sort of the analytics space.
That's a very good question, Richard. At ECB, we work a lot on that. We think that data governance needs to be managed centrally. we have to make sure that you onboard also all the businesses. And it's paramount, of course, that data quality, metadata, data accessibility, data security, all these different views on data governance, they are made an enterprise-wide priority. It's important. Otherwise, you cannot have good decision making based on that data. And for sure, if you want to adopt a bit distributed data architecture to bring down this time to market, but you don't want that all these data products are completely managed in a decentralized way in all freedom. So you need to have this company-wide data governance even more. Mm-hmm. So nevertheless, that maybe it is physically one hybrid platform, but we want to organize the way that is work with data decentralized. Well, if you delegate this data ownership from the central platform to domains, well, we need absolutely this centrally managed data governance to make sure that all the data products are compliant with it.
Yeah, and that's similar to the experience of the Bank of Canada as well. Like the way that the bank here is organized, there is a business unit called the Data and Statistics Office that oversees data governance predominantly for what we call the analytics community. So as distinct from, call it the corporate administration or the operations community. And so the questions right now are, well, given that there's lots of analytic applications or use cases in not only the operations community, but in the corporate admin, what does the future of data governance look like? Whereas we're like very sophisticated and mature, I would argue, within like one part of the Bank of Canada, the other part is less so. It hasn't needed to be more sophisticated, but the maturity requirement is increasing. And so that's an area that is under evolution at the Bank of Canada as well.
It's the same at Spacex Bank. It's a complex area, and it's what we've done. We have appointed information owners, so as a start for this. But it's also we have to put a lot of effort in having control of our data and classification of the data, and also how to get hold of the data. We like to have some sort of Spotify-like that you can download what kind of data you want to, but it's very hard to build a platform or a storage of data that can sort of solve all the needs that the business have regarding data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If I could add one other thing on this topic, I think there's an increase in conversation and a lot of focus on bringing up the overall baseline of the Bank of Canada in terms of a data literacy perspective. And I think that'll bear a lot of fruit in the long term, because traditionally I would argue that the skill sets and the knowledge, the understanding is somewhat of data, machine learning, analytics is somewhat asymmetrical across the bank. And so the more that we can bring everyone else to a common baseline, I think the more we'll be able to take advantage of some of these opportunities in the future.
Rob, on the Bank of England, do you have any particular best guidance on all the data that you're managing?
I mean, I would agree with some of the comments made, right? I think data stewardship and data ownership is absolutely paramount. You can have all of these bells and whistles and lovely toys, but if your data quality is off, as Dirk says, then it's kind of pointless spending the money on it. So for me, that's absolutely paramount. And just a bit like software development, you want to have a clear product owner who's driving the vision of where they want to take it, so that you can clearly upfront define benefits. Lots and lots of organizations and in ourselves, you spend a lot of money in analytics and AI and struggle to show where they've actually recognized the value and where it's saved them money. And I think you've got to be really clear as you go on this journey, which is to identify what are the business what are the clear business drivers, what's the vision, clear product ownership, and then make sure that you do benefits definition up front. I think it's interesting, even now when I think about the users and trying to skill them, the point Ben was making, that's key. If we think about we take a lot of economic graduates, etc., and they don't formally in a business school teach IT skills, right? And it's the same really. And we're getting to this interesting world where we have a lot of IT folk who are no longer considered to be the service desk, fixing PCs and printers. They're thinking about business outcomes in a much more kind of business-minded way. And that's where you're getting this lovely blurring in the middle between engineering capability and business knowledge, both of them trying to get into this space. I'm a big believer that actually technologists have got a bit of an early mover's advantage because of their knowledge and understanding of underlying databases and data. But they absolutely have to step into the whole of what does the organization want to achieve to realize that. But I think the fundamental is definitely data governance. The rest of it is skills, and then as you say, having the modern technologies that you can try out in a safe environment to do so.
Yeah. No, I think you actually led into another area, which is away from data, but as we move right into the machine learning and AI space, and I think all of you have addressed this sort of, in some sense, the cultural requirements of enabling the wider organization, not necessarily to do deep level data science, right? I mean, that's a little more for the specialists, but the ability of actually leveraging it from a business or practical perspective. Are you doing certain things across your teams or wider teams within your own respective institutions, to try to, and I think Dirk had this one, sort of the linkage between AI and business, but upskilling the overall staff. And I'm just curious if that's sort of a common view and what you might be doing to help address this.
I also think besides the upskilling, I think the cultural challenges are omnipresent. I really think so. So I would say, and allow me to use a word that some of us maybe will not like, the silo mentality. We still a bit my data, my model. That's a bit a main challenge, because some of the data scientists, they are all sitting on the golden egg, of course, but this my data, my model, that doesn't allow diverse teams to contribute. And diversity is a key accelerator for AI solutions. I strongly believe in that. And I would like to say two others. The second one is that is easier to do. There should be a very good trust-building collaboration between business subject matter experts and IT subject matter experts, because the tandem, these two together, then the sky is the limit. So we have to bring them together. It's not always there, but we have still to work on it. And then last but not least, is also important in cultural change, is building AI services is not the same as building classical services. And I give one example only. For instance, the effort of the business to train models is different than testing old-style apps. So you can write a model, but the model is as good as the trained data, labeled data that you feed onto it. Otherwise, the model will not give you the right stuff. And training the model, this effort, that's also part of new culture challenge, because the time you have to put into it is much more than, like I said, simple testing old style applications.
Great. Ben or Ulrika, do you have any particular guidance for the audience as well?
I think the experience from the Bank of Canada, again, is quite similar. I wonder about many of the same things that Dirk has raised. The differences between a traditional IT project for which there's ample best practices and from a governance perspective, and how well that will apply to machine learning projects. Those are open questions, for me anyway. And the limited experience that we've got now, there's lots of data science, machine learning work kind of in the research area, but from an operational component, some of the limited experience suggests that it is different, right? Like tailoring the model and setting expectations around when that model, and in this case, I'm referring to like just a simple invoice processing use case, and getting to setting expectations when that model is going to produce a sufficient outcome is difficult to nail down. And so there's, again, I think things tend to circle back around to the overarching governance of the organization in terms of like finances, projects, those sorts of things, and how those will apply in the new environment. And do people understand what machine learning is, what it entails, even at a very basic level, so that everyone can participate in the activity in the way that they're expected to participate in it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. I think it's Rob's example around the lunch line prediction. That's a great way of getting people to understand, how practical machine learning and AI can become. Well, Ruki, you're from a much smaller organization with not thousands of data scientists that some of the organizations here have. So what is the Reichsbank doing with regard to sort of cultural changes as you start to adapt and bring in more machine learning and AI capabilities?
As I said before, it's more about fostering a culture of innovative thinking and sharing, and also to get back on that part that Ben and Dirk talked about. I think also it's about, for us, it's about to create a possibility to share the results, because even if people are working in silos today, we need to sort of have the possibility to share the results of what different data scientists or researchers are doing, and also to work together to collaborate and to build on top on other results. So the sum of the total will be bigger than by each individual. So I think that's something that we are working on to build the culture, and also to be able to share the result in an easier way, and to work together on that.
Great. I've got the notice here that we're hitting the end of our time. I wanted to thank all four of you for the wonderful insights. I think you really illustrate how central banks and regulators are driving innovation in all aspects of your business, but you're doing it in a very structured, sort of paced manner, which I think is really important. And I think in my mind, the most telling part about this is how you're also focused on making sure there's value driven. It's not just purely innovation for innovation's sake. It's about really driving value across your institutions and also the citizens that you serve. So thank you very, very much. This is an incredible conversation. I'd love to go for another hour or two, but unfortunately we're ending here. But thanks very much for your efforts and participation.
Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
Thank you.